So we've got one semi-successful, semi-pretty knife. Failure to fully weld. Partial success. And no starter. If there's only voiceover in this, it's because I'm trying out a new microphone and it might have been terrible. I don't know how to forge weld. I know how. I haven't. I've done it once as a test before doing this video. So we're gonna do some forge welding today. I have a billet of bandsaw blades my brother whipped up at one point. I got some old fencing fortes off of some old foils of mine. And then, just piles and piles of junk. I'm going to grab some out of that and get it all cleaned up, and we're going to get welding. I'll put it in there just long enough.
So real quick, what is forge welding? Forge welding is taking two pieces of steel and making them become one. Not just sticking them together like you would with glue, but like taking two pieces of clay and working them together until it's the same piece. Now, if you can imagine, if you took that clay and you rubbed it in dirt and dust, it wouldn't stick to another piece of clay very well. You'd be right. Same is true with steel, and that's why we use flux. Now, you clean the steel. You take off as much of the rust and the, everything that you can, the scale. But more is going to form due to oxygen interacting with the hot steel. So the flux protects the steel from oxidizing and protects it from having scale form and should help any impurities like scale melt faster than the steel and flow out of the joint.
And I just melted a hole in my little container. Nice. Getting close.
Now I'm trying 3 different approaches here to learn as much as I can as quickly as I can. These aren't approaches necessarily optimized for success, especially this first one. The first time I tried it, I did this exact approach using wire to hold the pieces together, and it did work. This time, not so much.
Couple light taps. Stuck together, that means we're doing it right. I'll flux it again. And back in. It's just barely sticking. I was able to break it free. So we might not be hot enough. I'm going to get it a little bit hotter. Glove got too hot. No, it's not sticking.
The wire technique can work and is useful for anyone who doesn't have access to a welder of some kind.
Seems like it has maybe the slightest amount, but then it moves again. So it's just not hot enough. Well, I'd like to keep trying with these, but that wire's gone. Looks like it's melded in on the back. So that part welded. We're gonna douse these and try another billet. 4 fortes off of fencing foils. Say that 5 times fast. Into the fire. We're a little hotter than I should have let it get. We're getting some of this on there. Throw some flux in. We're gonna consolidate it because there's a lot of gaps in between those pieces. They're not perfectly ground to fit. We're just gonna douse this in flux. Douse it.
Scale forms, specifically black oxide scale, forms at a certain temperature. I think it's like 1750 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's a good idea to get your flux on before reaching that temperature. In this case, I'm dumping a ton on with the idea that any impurities that are in between these pieces, the flux will get down in there and then I can squeeze it back out. Of course, if it gets in there and can't get out, it'll stop them from welding.
That's pretty good. It's not perfect. A little bit more, and back in the fire. Is this too much flux? Probably. It's ready when the surface of the steel looks wet, I've heard. Haven't seen that myself. Oh, maybe like that then. Sticking it together. Back in the forge.
Now you'll see sometimes when I'm pulling these billets out, a few little sparks coming off the edges of them. That's a good sign, as I understand it. It means you're at the right temperature. You don't want them rapidly sparking, because that means you're burning your steel, which is bad for the structure of it.
Looking like it's moving as one, but I can still see the lines. Nope, there's a big old gap on the end there. That is not one piece. It is not stuck. This is hard.
Now I'm leaving these first couple mostly at real-time speed and mostly unedited, so you can sort of see what I'm doing to actually get the benefit of this learning. Just speeding it up, tell you a whole lot. Anyone watching who knows a bit more about it might be able to look at it and give me some possible commentary.
It's good. I have a fire.
But do understand, I know this isn't optimal. I want to do some things that aren't the best so I see what happens, see what's wrong. So when I'm doing what I think is right, I can say, wait a minute, this looks just like when it wasn't working.
They all seem to be cooling as one piece, which is a good sign. You can still see the seam. That could easily just be because they were not perfectly aligned, which they were not. I can also see what looks like cracks in several of the blades, which may mean that there were already cracks built into those blades. When they did break, that is why they were cut up like that. Just see one there. I'm going to clean that out real quick with an angle grinder, throw some flux on it, and see if we can't just forge that down. Wow, that glove got really hot really fast. Next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to heat it up. I'll put it under the press real quick.
This definitely illustrates one of the dangers of working with mystery steel or old steel, is that it can have fractures already in it. And here you can see I broke apart the weld by forging it, in that direction. It pushed that weld apart. It made the two pieces slide.
There we go, look at that. Not welded. All the way down the whole length. From the looks of it, it is also not welded in that area. We've got one more bandsaw blade billet. My brother put this together. I have no idea how clean the steel was when he welded it, but what the heck, let's throw it in there and see what happens. Now what you see in there is so hot, I can't really comfortably look at it with my bare eyes. I've been using shade 5 glasses. It's really hard to get a good shot because I can't get close enough. And I'll try again when it's about ready, but that's what it starts to look like. Here we go. I hope this works. Flux and back in. Woo! Can't even get my fingers close enough to it. I need to make a flux spoon or something. I'm gonna brush it, I'm gonna flux it, and I'm gonna take it under the press on the third one. Squish it down real good, real well. Well, not exactly what I was hoping for. As you can see, there's some nasty cracking. Parts of it look okay, but I see stress fractures in other parts. So I kind of want to let it cool down and grind on it a little bit and see what we see. That was a lot of grinding. Some of it's left, and I don't think I've gotten all the cracks. Let's find out.
A quick etch just to take a look at what I can't see, and, well, it tells quite the story.
Okay. One side etches really dark and has interesting lines all over it. You can see the leftover teeth of one of the saw blades in there, so they must have slid. This looks just like a network of cracks, especially, it comes from that part there. The other side is all nice and bright and shiny, and I can see the edges, but there's very clearly some delams or not fully welded edges. And here's very interesting, because it's mostly blank, big chunks of gray with some interspersed little cracky looking things. But then right here, we've got like some nice pretty lines. I feel like that's good. And all the rest is trash. A little more grinding and see what happens.
And of course, by see what happens, I mean, let's make something out of it, because that's really the only way to see what's going to happen with this steel. So I'm going to make a knife out of it, because of course. One of the biggest things you can use forge welding for is pattern welded steel, or Damascus, making those pretty pieces of metal to make cool stuff out of. This is going to really stress those welds, and if they're going to pop apart, this is when they're going to do it. In fact, I do find a layer back on the tang here that split open. It's a small, well, it's a pretty nasty delamination, but it's pretty far back on the tang. It's probably okay. But either way, this is about learning. So, this is my first Damascus knife, and even with that flaw, I'm pretty pleased with how it turns out. After a lot of grinding and a quick etch, I can see that the layers are showing, and
there's some pattern in there. Some properly welded layers. On the other side, there's nothing. But the goal wasn't to make a successful knife, it was just to test the Damascus. So, yeah, nasty delam on the tang. Might be okay all the way back there,
Now, in finishing this knife is where the inconsistency in that billet really came to bite me, because one side was very clearly different metal than the other, and in the heat treat, it just bent like crazy until I had ground through a huge portion of that. Eventually, I got it to be sort of straight, and then as I heat treated it, I got it really straight, but then as I ground it again for this finish polish, it started moving more and more. So I had to keep going back and forth and ended up losing quite a bit of the end of the blade there. I think it's ended up about 2/3 the original forged size. But there it is. I'll be doing plenty more with this. In fact, I already have 3 more billets underway. And as a thank you for all the support that I've received, I've passed almost 1,500 subscribers, and for the support on Patreon, I'll be making some sort of giveaway in the coming months. I gotta do something with those billets after all. But that's all for now, so thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.